The first thing Daniel Carter heard that morning was his daughter's voice saying, "Daddy, don't forget to come home tonight." It was a simple sentence, the kind most people would forget within minutes. But Daniel carried it with him as he walked through the glass doors of Carter Dynamics, the company he had built from nothing. He was 38 years old, a single father, and the owner of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the city. But unlike the wealthy executives who arrived in luxury cars and walked through private entrances, Daniel still drove an old silver sedan, still packed his daughter Lily's lunch every morning, and still kept a photo of her beside his desk. That morning, however, everything changed before he could even reach the elevator. The lobby was unusually quiet. Employees who normally greeted him suddenly looked away. Two security officers stood near the reception desk, and beside them was a woman in a dark navy suit holding a federal identification badge. Daniel slowed down. "Can I help you?" he asked. The woman turned toward him. Her name was Evelyn Grant, a federal prosecutor known throughout the city for handling major financial crimes. She looked at Daniel for only a second before turning to the security guards. "That's him," she said. Daniel frowned. "Excuse me?" Before he could take another step, one of the guards grabbed his arm. "Sir, you're under arrest." The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Daniel stared at them in disbelief. Under arrest for what? The second guard pulled out handcuffs. Financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. A shocked murmur spread through the lobby. Daniel's face went pale. "That's impossible. This is my company." But the words had barely left his mouth when the handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Someone gasped. Someone else raised a phone. And within seconds, the man who had built the company was standing in the center of his own lobby like a criminal while dozens of employees watched. Daniel turned toward Evelyn Grant. "You have the wrong person." The prosecutor stepped closer, her expression cold and professional. "Your name is Daniel Carter?" "Yes." "Founder and majority owner of Carter Dynamics?" "Yes." "Then we have the right person." Daniel shook his head. "I have never stolen a dollar from this company." Evelyn opened a folder. "According to our evidence, more than $12 million disappeared through accounts connected to you." Daniel's eyes widened. "What?" The employees began whispering. Some looked shocked. Others looked frightened. And one man, standing near the elevators, Daniel's chief financial officer, Richard Voss, quietly lowered his head. Daniel noticed him. "Richard," Daniel said, "tell them this is a mistake." Richard didn't answer. "Richard," Daniel shouted. The CFO finally looked up, but there was something strange in his eyes. Not surprise, not fear, something closer to satisfaction. "I'm sorry, Daniel," Richard said quietly. "The evidence speaks for itself." Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. For 8 years, Richard had been the man he trusted with everything. He had signed the checks, managed the accounts, reviewed the financial reports, and sat beside Daniel during every major business decision. "You know, I didn't do this," Daniel whispered. Richard looked away. Evelyn motioned toward the exit. "Take him out." Daniel was led through the same doors he had once opened for thousands of employees. Outside, cameras were already waiting. Somehow, the news had arrived before the arrest was even complete. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Carter, did you steal millions from your own company? Did you use company money to support your lifestyle? Are you guilty?" Daniel said nothing. His hands were cuffed behind his back, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about Lily, his 9-year-old daughter. He had promised to pick her up from school. He had promised they would make pancakes that evening. And now the entire city was about to see her father being taken away in handcuffs. But the real shock came later, when Evelyn Grant returned to the federal office and placed the evidence on a table. The case seemed perfect. There were digital signatures, bank transfers, approval codes, and emails bearing Daniel's name. Every document pointed directly at him. But Evelyn had spent 15 years prosecuting criminals, and something bothered her. The evidence was too perfect. Every trail led to Daniel. Every document had his approval. Every transaction appeared to have been authorized by him. Yet the more she studied the files, the more one detail began to disturb her. The fraud had been carefully designed to make Daniel look guilty, but whoever created the evidence had made one mistake. They had used an old security authentication system that Daniel had stopped using nearly 3 years earlier. Evelyn pulled up the records. "Who had access to this system?" she asked. An investigator answered, "Only 3 people. Daniel Carter, Richard Voss, and the company's former systems administrator." "Former?" Evelyn asked. "He left the company 2 years ago." Evelyn stared at the file. "Find him." Meanwhile, Daniel sat in a holding room, staring at the floor. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. His company was collapsing. His reputation was destroyed. His bank accounts had been frozen, and his daughter had been told that her father was being investigated for stealing millions. When Lily finally saw him through the glass during a supervised visit, she tried to be brave. She sat down and placed her small hand against the glass. "Daddy," she whispered, "did you do something bad?" Daniel's heart broke. He lifted his hand and pressed it against hers. "No, sweetheart," he said. "I didn't." "Then why are you here?" Daniel looked at his daughter and forced himself not to cry. "Because sometimes people can lie very well." Lily nodded, slowly, but her eyes filled with tears. "I believe you." Those 3 words gave Daniel the strength to keep fighting. He had lost his company. He had lost his freedom. But he could not lose his daughter's faith. 2 days later, Evelyn Grant returned to Carter Dynamics with a warrant. She walked through the company's offices and began examining the financial department. Richard Voss was waiting for her. "I already gave your investigators everything," he said confidently. "Then you won't mind if we look again?" Evelyn replied. Richard smiled nervously. But while investigators searched the company's servers, Evelyn noticed something unusual. Richard kept checking his phone. Every few minutes, he looked toward a locked storage room. Evelyn followed his gaze. "What's in there?" she asked. Richard hesitated. "Old equipment." "Open it." "I don't have the key." Evelyn stared at him. "Then we'll find someone who does." The room was opened. Inside were boxes of old computer equipment, archive files, and a small black laptop. One investigator picked it up. "This isn't listed in the company inventory." Richard suddenly became pale. "That belongs to me." Evelyn turned toward him. "Then why was it hidden inside a locked company storage room?" Richard had no answer. The laptop was taken for examination. Hours later, investigators found something that changed everything. The laptop contained deleted files, encrypted communications, and a hidden folder containing copies of the exact financial documents used to arrest Daniel. But the files had been created months before the alleged fraud had even occurred. Evelyn stared at the screen. He planned this in advance. The investigation moved quickly. The former systems administrator was located and questioned. At first, he refused to speak. But when investigators showed him the evidence, he finally broke down. He admitted that Richard had paid him to create unauthorized access to the company's financial systems. Richard had slowly transferred millions of dollars into hidden accounts, then created fake digital records designed to make it appear that Daniel had approved everything. But there was more. Richard had also arranged for Daniel to be arrested publicly because he knew the company would collapse without its founder. His plan was to force the board to remove Daniel, take control of the company, and secretly purchase the failing business through another corporation he owned. It was a perfect betrayal, except for one thing. Richard had underestimated Evelyn Grant. The federal prosecutor returned to the holding facility the next morning. Daniel was sitting alone when the door opened. He looked up, expecting another lawyer. But when he saw Evelyn, he stood. "What happened?" he asked. Evelyn placed a file on the table. "You're going home." Daniel stared at her. "What?" "The charges against you are being dismissed." He didn't move. "Why?" Evelyn looked him directly in the eyes. "Because you were framed." Daniel slowly sat down. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. "Who did it?" Evelyn paused. "Your CFO." Daniel closed his eyes. Richard's face appeared in his mind. Every meeting, every handshake, every time Daniel had trusted him. "Why?" he whispered. "Money," Evelyn said. "And control." Daniel shook his head. He was like family. Evelyn's voice softened. Sometimes betrayal hurts most when it comes from the person you never thought you needed to watch. But the story did not end there. When Daniel returned to Carter Dynamics, the entire company had gathered in the lobby. Employees stood silently as he walked through the doors. Some were crying. Some lowered their heads in shame because they had believed the accusations. And then Lily came running toward him. Daniel dropped to his knees, and she threw her arms around his neck. He held her tightly as the cameras flashed around them. For a moment, the company, the money, the headlines, and the betrayal all disappeared. There was only a father and his daughter. Later that afternoon, Daniel stood before the employees. He could have fired everyone. He could have sold the company. He could have walked away forever. Instead, he looked around the room and said, "I built this company believing that trust was more valuable than money. Someone used that trust against me. But I refused to let one person destroy everything the rest of us built together." The employees applauded. Then Daniel made an announcement nobody expected. He created a new ethics and security division inside the company and placed Evelyn Grant's investigative recommendations at the center of its policies. Richard Voss was eventually arrested and charged for the financial crimes he had committed. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The man who had tried to destroy Daniel's life was now facing the consequences of his own plan. Months later, Daniel stood in the same lobby where he had once been handcuffed. The company was stronger than ever. His reputation had been restored, but the experience had changed him. He no longer measured success by the size of his bank account or the number of employees beneath him. He measured it by something far more important: the people who still stood beside him when the world believed the worst. That evening, Daniel returned home to find Lily waiting at the kitchen table with 2 plates of pancakes. She smiled and said, "You're late." Daniel laughed. "I know." She pointed at the chair. "Sit down." He sat beside her, and she pushed a pancake toward him. "I save you the biggest one." Daniel looked at his daughter and smiled. "You always do." Lily studied him for a moment. "Daddy." "Yes." "When they put you in handcuffs, were you scared?" Daniel thought about the question. Then he answered honestly, "Yes." "But you didn't give up?" "No." "Why?" Daniel reached across the table and held her hand. "Because sometimes the truth takes time. But if you keep standing, eventually the truth finds you." And that was the lesson Daniel Carter carried with him for the rest of his life. The world may judge you in a moment. Friends may betray you. And even the doors you built may one day close against you. But if you know who you are, if you refuse to surrender, and if even one person still believes in you, the story is never over. Because sometimes the man everyone watches being taken away in handcuffs is the very man who will one day walk back through those same doors and make everyone who doubted him stand up and listen. And as Daniel walked out of the kitchen that night, Lily's voice followed him. "Daddy, you're not a criminal." Daniel stopped at the doorway, turned around, and smiled. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "But I learned something." Lily tilted her head. "What?" Daniel looked toward the window, where the city lights shimmered in the distance. Never let someone else's lie become the truth you believe about yourself. Years later, people would remember the shocking headlines, the handcuffs, the accusations, and the betrayal inside Carter Dynamics. But Daniel remembered something else. The moment his daughter placed her hand against the glass and told him, "I believe you." That was the moment he decided he would never give up. Because sometimes the world can turn against you in a single day. But one person's faith can give you the strength to fight for years. And when the truth finally came out, Daniel didn't just get his company back. He got his name, his freedom, and the respect of everyone who had once doubted him. The man who had been humiliated inside his own company walked back through those same doors as a free man, holding his daughter's hand. And this time, nobody dared to look away.